Welcome to Geopolitics Demystified. I'm your host, S.L. Canthan. Today we have a fascinating guest, Dr. Karen Kwiatkowski, and she comes from a very wonderful background in terms of foreign policy. She used to be in the U.S. military as a lieutenant colonel, and then she worked at the Pentagon and the NSA. And for about the last 2 decades, she's been speaking out against, uh, the U.S. foreign policy that is very misguided and wrong and bad for the U.S. and the world. So, welcome, Karen. So glad to have you.
Oh, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Wonderful. So let's start off with the big picture. Why is the US foreign policy so dysfunctional and it's just stuck in perpetual wars, a lot of the hostility? And from a philosophical point of view, I mean, it's obviously bad because of all the death and destruction. But from a pragmatic point of view as well, the U.S. Just wastes trillions of dollars on these useless wars, and it makes a lot of the enemies, and it's pushing the rivals together like Russia and
Right.
China. And if we go back to 1970s, Nixon was smart enough to pull China away from the Soviet Union. So they don't even seem to have that basic geopolitical smartness. And so now we can see the BRICS summit. It just happened the last 3 days, and about 40 countries representing more than half the world's population went to Russia. They schmoozed with Putin, and they're trying to plan a new world order that's going to be different from the US-led world order over the last 75, 80 years. So, what are your thoughts on why the US foreign policy is so misguided and who is actually in charge of this policy?
Yeah. Who's in charge is a good question because it's not a single person. Certainly not in the current administration, because we know that Joe Biden is actually not competent. I mean, he's not always there all the time. So he's not operating even as the kind of president that any normal country would expect to have. So, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that he is incompetent. It also doesn't matter that the vice president is equally uninformed on foreign policy and can't communicate very well. That also does not matter because the foreign policy and domestic policy to a great extent is really driven by the permanent bureaucracy. And that permanent bureaucracy, which is large, I mean, it's much larger than the Constitution ever imagined it would be. You know, the federal government consumes about 35% of the GDP of the United States. So that's federal government collection, redistribution, and of course, borrowing in the name of the taxpayer, which is the debt. So this is a huge portion of the US economy, and it is based around war, of course. We know that the war, because you can't be a unipolar, you can't be the top dog, the top policeman of the planet without some enforcement means, right? So this has been kind of the push post World War II, certainly, that the US is in charge. And because it's in charge, it has to exercise force. And that's kind of set the stage. And it's what Eisenhower talked about in his farewell speech. In fact, it's funny because George Washington also warned us in his farewell speech. I wish these presidents would warn us at the beginning of their administration instead of at the end. But they warn us at the end about what's happening. And of course, Eisenhower worried that decisions were going to be made based on things that weren't really good for the American economy or Americans, or not even consistent with our Constitution, but they would be made by a technocratic bureaucracy of experts, but not just experts, interested experts, experts that would be also profiting from the things that they were advising we spend money on. So profiting from war, profiting from intervention, and also in that same time frame, the past 40, 50, 60 years, profiting from financial aid to countries around the world. Because, we don't just give them arms and try to manipulate their politics. We also subsidize things that they're doing to get them to do things that we want them to do. So we throw a lot of money around. Now, the United States is able to do this because we have a Federal Reserve Bank, which is beholden to the politicians. So they say, oh, the Federal Reserve Bank is an independent entity, but it's not. It is the banker for the US government, providing unlimited funding. And that's basically been the foreign policy. It's a policy of money distribution, money control, and of course, money spent on high profit, politically rewarding things like military industrial complex, military production, things that support military production. The biggest export the United States has, sometimes it's oil, it depends, but usually and consistently, it is defense type information, offense and defense weaponry and that kind of thing. So that's what Washington cares about, because that's the life that Washington leads. And there are no statesmen. You say, where are the great leaders? Nixon actually thought about things from a geopolitical broad perspective. Kissinger, for all of his evil sins, because Kissinger was not a good person, but he thought about things in the great power context and tried to make decisions that would put the United States in a positive place. We don't have people like that anymore. They are basically short-term grifters. That's who runs our government. And they are embedded in the deep state, the permanent bureaucracy that doesn't need an election. So these elections that we get all hyped about, oh, who will it be? What will they do? Frankly, they won't do much. They can't do much because our system is captured by the industries that feed the permanent bureaucracy. It's a problem. It's a real problem, and it is unconstitutional. It is not the way our country was intended to be.
Wow. So, okay, so there's no one person. So it's like a swarm. They just will agree with each other, and then
yeah, it really is. That's a good analogy, because it's like a swarm. It's like an insect hive of ants or bees. And you know what, ants, I keep bees on my farm, so I know a little bit about bees. But bees will, of course, defend the hive. And they also will kick out those that aren't contributing to the hive. They do this very, of course, they're insects, so they don't think about it in moral terms, but it is really an impersonal thing. If you're not producing, if you're a bee that is getting old and they don't live that long in the summer, you're gone. If you're a drone and you have mated, that's your one job for the year. You're gone. They kick them out of the hive, and these guys are alive, and they refuse to feed them, so they quickly die. This is how hives work, and it is a good analogy for how the deep state operates. If you are in Washington, and we have some examples of this. We have a Congressman, Thomas Massie. He often stands before an empty chamber and protests, and no one hears him and no one wants him. And if they could get rid of him, they would. We know that AIPAC funded his primary. He was primaried by another person in his Kentucky district, and they primaried him to the tune of over $1 million, and that's pretty big for a primary in that part of Kentucky. And they did it statewide to try to head off a possible Senate run that Thomas Massie may be thinking about doing. And because they hate Thomas Massie, they want him out of the hive. Okay, he is not productive for what they are doing. And we don't have enough Thomas Massies. We have very few Thomas Massies, and so it's a real difficult thing to change. So how does a hive get changed? I mean, because you brought up this hive concept, I like it. It's good. How does a hive get changed? Well, usually a hive will die from internal decay or disease. This happens, or it will be destroyed from outside by a predator, whether that predator is another insect or an animal that likes to eat honey and will destroy the hive. And those are the two ways that hives die. They do not transform themselves from within very easily.
Mm.
Occasionally, they will kill the queen because the queen is bad, right? Kill the queen, get a new queen. But that is not going to change the directions drastically. It is simply going to make it a little bit healthier. So maybe that's what we're doing with our elections. We're trying to kill the old queen and put the new queen in. But the major changes are not going to happen. Now, they will happen with decay. And you mentioned the debt. Debt is huge. I'm a believer that the debt is unsustainable. I think that it will be written down and written off. And when that happens, some of it's owed to the American people. We will have terrible situation in the United States, and they're preparing for this militarily. This is they're preparing for domestic unrest in the situation of a spike in inflation, or maybe hyperinflation, or a severe increase in taxes with a reduction in government services. Any of these things they're preparing for because people will be angry. And then, of course, overseas, the holders of our debt overseas, if we write that down or default on that, certainly that impacts the government's ability to operate. And these things are sometimes the cause of war, but also war is very often the cause of a government that wishes not to pay its debts, and it needs an excuse. And so war is that excuse. War is always that excuse, because as soon as I declare you my enemy, I am not going to pay my
Mm.
debts to you. Now, it's very possible, and I haven't given this much thought, but it's very possible our antagonism against China is very much consistent with the long-term view that China may be able to influence us because they have a stronger, bigger economy in many ways that can subsidize our standard of living. Certainly, China has subsidized our standard of living. The whole rest of the world has subsidized the American standard of living. It can't really continue, and how it will change. We probably are young enough that we will see it change. We're going
Mm.
to witness this change, and let's hope it's not war. Let's hope it's just an internal collapse with a positive transformation of the United States into something a little bit different than what it has become.
Yeah. So when you see, say these things, they seem very logical to me. And I don't know why it's so hard for the
Yeah.
elites to understand. Hmm.
Well, one thing is the elites don't keep bees. They don't farm. They're not in touch with reality. They're not in touch with nature. This is very true. I mean, you know, you take a guy like RFK Jr., Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is, I guess, now allied with Trump, but he is a lifelong Democrat. He's the nephew of JFK, the son of RFK. So he is old style Democrats. The Democrats, of course, rejected him, but RFK has come around. He's an elite. He is a liberal elite. Okay, he's not a libertarian. He's he is a person who embraces the idea that there is a progressive idea, that the elite can know the directions we should go, and that they are good people to lead us in that direction, and they have every duty to do this. That's the attitude of a progressive, that we're smarter, we know better, and we're going to make things happen that'll be better for everybody. We believe this. This is a progressive attitude. Well, RFK Jr. came from that upbringing. But what happened was in his life of suing the government to make it follow its own rules, because that's what he had done in food safety, vaccine safety, and environmental safety, he came to understand that the people that he thought were the elites, the people that he thought we could trust to lead us into the future, he found that they were all a bunch of liars and frauds. And he will effectively say this in a very articulate way. He explains what he was up against and what he dealt with. So he now rejects them. And I think in his heart, he's still progressive, but he understands that the elites, who are supposed to be smarter, wiser, faster, and care about all of us, it's a fantasy in the United States. It's possible that there are some places in the world that have elites that are not corrupt, that are actually qualified to lead and actually have big picture ideas that are good and moral. It is possible, but it does not exist in the United States. So, but we have a fantasy that it does. We like to think, oh, we can elect a president or a party to lead us, and they will then push forth these ideals, but they won't. It's just an illusion that many people are waking up to. Now, jumping around a little bit, but you think about Donald Trump, right? He was a Democrat, much like Ronald Reagan was a Democrat back in the early, the late 50s and early 60s. Ronald Reagan was a Democrat, but Donald Trump was kind of a Democrat. He was a New York businessman. New York is heavily Democrat. This is the circles that he ran in. And over time, he became politically interested in things. He didn't know which party to pick, and he ended up running those primaries in 2016 and winning. And he didn't expect to win the primaries because he was an outsider. His message was not necessarily a Republican message; it was a populist message, and it caught on, and it of course put him into office in 2016. And made him an enemy of the elites because he is a populist standard bearer, which is why the Democrats hate him, which is strange because the old Democratic Party was populist, but now they're not. Anyway, this populism is not represented in this country, in our government. It's not, we don't have a popular government. We have a elite government that is very afraid of populism. And we see this in Europe also. In Europe, you see the same thing. The elites are afraid of populism, which is the opposite of democracy, because a democracy is supposed to be what the people want. Now, obviously, democracy has many flaws. If you don't protect the rights of minorities, democracy quickly moves into tyranny, and this is a problem. But anyway, we have unrest in our country. We have people who recognize what I'm telling you, that it seems, oh, well, that sounds logical. It seems to be borne out with the evidence. Yes, many people in America see it, and they would tell you the same thing. They may not tell it to you like I'm saying it, but they will say, I'm not represented. I don't feel my country is going in the right direction. I hate war. If you ask Americans, do they want war? They don't. They never do. They didn't want it in Vietnam. They didn't want it in Iraq. Usually they have to be manipulated into it via something like a Pearl Harbor, which was a manipulation. A 9/11, which certainly did not have to happen. There was no reason for 9/11 to happen. We knew all about it ahead of time, could have prevented it, but we didn't, because Americans won't become hungry for war unless they're slapped in the face really hard. And that's what is required. So our government knows this very well. They've studied us, not as representatives, but as, I think, opponents to the people.
Yeah. I mean, I think that even like going back to the Spanish-American War, the ship that blew up in
The
Cuba.
Maine, the USS Maine.
Yeah. So I think that was a false flag as well.
Oh, it absolutely was. There's a long list of false flags. And, in Vietnam, we had the LBJ,
The
I
Gulf
forget
of
the name.
Tonkin.
Yeah, Tonkin Gulf scenario. And we have people who were there, of course, who spoke out. This was in the Gulf of Tonkin situation, of course, before the internet. But many people talked about it. Many people knew about it. And only after the internet do we, the people, are able to say, oh, wow, this looks very similar to this and that and the other thing. So we have a series of false flags. Our government is very good at that. The CIA generally is where we would consider the false flag production factory. They're very large in their budget. I don't know how big they are in people, because, it's a secret organization. We don't have full visibility into the CIA, but certainly they have a black budget. And by a black budget, I mean, it is a secret budget. It is not even given directly to the CIA. The money for CIA operations is deposited in other agencies, so that you really can't, they share it out and then pull it back from these various hidden accounts. And it's probably why the Pentagon can never pass an audit, because it's holding money. The Pentagon is a big place that holds money, I think, for the CIA. Now, I'm speaking out of school here, but I do know that we have money in the Pentagon that is not accounted for, and it's used for things. And I think the CIA is one of the agencies that has access to that. We pick on some of the countries in the world who have bribery scandals, because they pay politicians or they pay business people or business people pay the politicians, however it goes. And we say, oh, that's really terrible. Well, I think that very thing happens in the United States at all levels, both the unsophisticated level and the sophisticated level.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And they do it, I mean, and it's all legalized,
Yes.
they just bribe through lobbying,
Oh, yeah.
campaigns, or
Yes.
book
Yes.
deals,
Yeah. Oh, the book deals are amazing. I used to be a believer in, oh, wow, New York Times bestseller list. It's amazing. Look, this guy, this ex-politician wrote a book and it's #1. And I'm like, well, I wonder who buys that. Turns out one guy buys all the books or one company buys all the books, and gives them away free because nobody's ever reading them. Um,
Yeah,
but yeah, it's a way. We have our ways. Just like well, when government gets large, it begins to think about itself more than the people it's supposed to, represents. And that's where we are. Our government is way too big. It's way too convoluted. Honestly, uh, a king, a king might have a large government in days of kings when kings ran things, but they had trusted staffs and trusted military people. It's kind of like I hate to say this, but little Zelensky in Ukraine, he's like a little king because he's certainly not the elected leader anymore because his term expired, but he's like a little king and he's constantly firing people because they're not trustworthy anymore. Well, at least a king can do that. A king can fire people. A king can say, can no one rid me of this terrible person, and somebody will get rid of that terrible person for them. And so that's power. And but in our deep state, in our permanent bureaucracy, in the way that our Congress is so lobbied and manipulated and owned and controlled by special interests, because of all that, our president can't do those things. He can't really fire people. He fires people, but all the people below him will continue the work. You almost have to clean out entire agencies. And I think this is why they're a little bit scared of the second administration of Trump, perhaps, because Trump was an optimistic person about government. He believed what he had been taught in school. What he had been told in the media about how the government works. And then when he got there, he found out people would manipulate him, lie to him to his face, undermine him. Of course, he had enemies everywhere in his own staff in many ways. Mike Pompeo. I don't know if you followed him at all, but
yeah, yeah,
Pompeo's a big, nasty neocon.
yeah,
And he had been, CIA director. I don't know what, he had all these jobs. He's a terrible person, but he wrote in his after he left Trump's administration because he was appointed in for something. I guess I can't even remember what jobs Trump gave him, and we were appalled that he did it. But afterwards, Pompeo said, "Oh yeah, I hated the guy. I just kissed up to him because I knew the kind of person he was. This is how I could ingratiate myself, so I did that." But he is, and then badmouthed him terribly. Because he didn't badmouth him like, oh, I had a bad experience and I changed my mind. He said, no, I always believed he was terrible and I manipulated him. So this is what he wrote in his own memoirs. So
wow,
and he said this, and there's thousands of people like him in Washington, and they don't believe in civilian control. They believe they're the military guys. And the weird thing is they're not military guys for the most part. So they really don't have a real sense of what our military might is supposed to be about or what it's capable of, or importantly, what it is not capable of. Because as we have seen, okay, the Red Sea, for example, we have an operation. I forget the name of it. It's the
yeah. It's
Operation
called, I mean, the Operation Prosperity Guardian or something like
Guardian
that.
Prosperity. That's right.
Yeah.
And that has been a real failure from day one. Very expensive. We've lost a number of expensive drones that are in the multi-millions of dollars. None of the ships have been protected. Insurance rates are usually high. Traffic is down. It is not a success, and it's not a success because our military, the elites that are running our foreign policy and our military, the hive that kicks out Anybody that has a different idea, anybody that has a different perspective, those people are gone. They don't invest in the a devil's advocate. They don't invest in the 10th man that whose duty it is to disagree. We don't invest in that. And because we don't, we're going down a death spiral in capabilities. And our military cannot fight modern wars. Our defense productivity is geared to high profit items, not the things that are consumed, not war consumables. So we're way behind the power curve. We gave a whole bunch of stuff to Ukraine. Now Israel wants things. We're giving it to Israel. And we're like, oh my gosh, what do we have left? We have hardly anything left. And it's like, well, you experts weren't thinking about what's good for America. And you got us into this thing, and you don't listen to criticism. I mean, our government defines criticism as disinformation. It doesn't matter what it is. If it is critical of our government, it is disinformation. That's how they view it. And they believe that. See, may not believe, we think it's funny, but they actually believe it. And we'll see what happens at this election. We'll see what happens, because there are many people who believe things that are not true about our country, about politicians, about everything. And I think one of the guys that was interviewed on Tucker Carlson the other day said he thinks mental health situation, we will have a mental health crisis in this country about the second week in November when the numbers come in. And it's because they really believe things that are not true. And that's
Yeah.
a kind of a psychosis, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if you're in a place and what you see is not reality, and everybody else around you may see reality, but you don't, they are going to say you are mentally ill. You have a problem. You are not in your right state. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
we're going to have a problem.
I see on social media, some person would say, Trump is in Nazi. I'm like, man, he's not a Nazi. Maybe you can use it
No.
figuratively if you're really mad at somebody, so you can say like,
Yeah,
like in Seinfeld, they say soup Nazi.
soup Nazi, right.
They're like, no, Trump is really a Nazi. Like, come
That's
on.
right.
And then
That's right.
meanwhile, they're sending billions of dollars and weapons
The real
to the
Nazi.
neo-Nazis in Ukraine, like actual
I know.
actual Nazis.
That's right. Yeah, it's really crazy. A lot of Americans and a lot of Democrats, particularly, but all Americans, we don't, as a people, even though we should pay attention to foreign policy, because our government interferes around the world and has done so for 150 years, really. Um, but we don't pay a lot of attention to it. We say, oh, well, Constitution says the executive branch will do foreign policy. Any treaties will be confirmed by the Senate. Okay, sounds good to me. I don't need to worry about it. Well, we do need to worry about it because they don't follow the Constitution. We sent troops. We've got troops in Ukraine, have had troops and military installations, certainly bioweapons labs in Ukraine before the war, and nobody was consulted. Congress didn't approve that. We just sent troops with these THAAD radar defense systems or whatever to Israel. I think we're sending two. We sent one. It comes with 100 American troops. We don't even have a peace treaty or I'm sorry, we don't have a alliance, a military treaty of any type with Israel. We just have word of mouth, I guess you could say. And we didn't consult Congress on that either. And we've conducted, since the last time Congress declared war, which is their job under the Constitution, that was World War II. Only after Pearl Harbor raised the hackles of, and panicked Washington, because there had been talk of, FDR wanted to go into World War II. He was very anxious to fight it and to profit from it, of course, because, to us, wars are profit. To the modern generations of Americans, we're now realizing wars are costly, but in the earlier phase of this, wars were seen as profitable. It was a way to extend your influence and make money.
Yeah,
So
there
FDR
is
wanted to do
that
it.
famous speech called "War is a Racket" by
Oh yeah,
Smedley
sure.
Butler.
Medley Butler, absolutely, absolutely. And he observed this, and here's a guy, Smedley Butler, who spent 30 something years in the Marines, much of it in the Philippines, suppressing the Philippines, doing all this stuff, terrible things that we did, that all governments do when they're fighting in these countries to take their resources. And he discovered we were doing it because of United Fruit or whatever, the packing, the various industries that were interested in ensuring monopolies on the profit that could be coming from these countries. And it took him a long time to really come to this conclusion, but he based it on hard reality, the reality that he had coming up through the system, being both a soldier and a Marine and a three-star general. He understood, he came to understand how it all worked, and he wrote about it. And of course, I'm going to tell you this, I spent 20 years in the military, and I went to Naval War College and Armed Forces Staff College. I took both of those. These are just like, 1-year programs or whatever. The War College, you could do like a college thing at night. So you take a bunch of classes and you get like a little degree, I guess, or whatever it is. But anyway, they're supposed to help create military thinkers, strategists, and statesmen. I had never heard of Smedley Butler ever until like 4 years after I retired from the military. And of course, I'm trying to learn things, and I ran into it. And it was amazing. They don't teach this to our soldiers. And it's I was just watching an interview with Colonel Wilkerson, who used to be the staff aide for Colin Powell. Anyway, he's also a peace spokesman. He tends to well, I think he believes a little bit more in government than I do. I think he has trust that government can be reformed, and I'm pretty sure it can't be. But he said, well, we've been an imperial power since World War II. He commented on that, and I disagree with that, because we've been an imperial power since the Civil War. In fact, the Civil War was probably our first major imperial war, to extend federal power over places that didn't really want that federal power. And then, of course, some of the worst terrible things that were done to American people in the Civil War during the prosecution of that war were done by the same generals that had been conducting the Western expansion into the Native American population. And then as soon as Civil War was over, they took all that, including the soldiers that would stay with them, and continued that rampage to the West. So we have been an imperial power since 1860, let's just say 1860. And it's now 2024. So yeah, we're coming to the end of the natural end of rampaging empire. Now we're in the stage of imperial collapse, but most people don't recognize that. They don't see that. But every symptom of overreach, of imperial exhaustion, every symptom we have, extremely out of touch leadership, a lack of statesmen, no unifying vision that unifies the whole country. In fact, we have Trump with his Make America Great Again. It's a very populist message. It does unify a great many people, but a great many people is not the majority. Okay, it doesn't unify the majority. In fact, I would say half the country is unified against that group, and they think they're all fascist. Of course, they don't understand what the word means. They don't know what fascism is. They don't know what Nazis are, but they sense that it's something bad and we don't like it, and you must be that. So this division in the country is very much a sign of a declining empire, where people are saying, I'm more likely to say I'm a Virginian, or I am a Texan, or I'm a Californian, or I'm a New Yorker. I'm way more likely to say that than to say I'm an American. Now, in general, I'm speaking in general, that's the way people feel. They are losing their trust in the federal government. Of course, it's going bankrupt. The pain of that bankruptcy has not yet begun to appear, and it will be awful, because we have been a people very spoiled, in many ways, by these policies of enriching ourselves at the expense of the planet, enriching ourselves at the point of a gun. Not a good way, not a good way. And we've created enemies, because, you think about it, if America had a big problem, like a civil war or something, I would expect the world to either stand by to cheer They might cheer. They might just stand by and do nothing, or they will seek an opportunity to pursue their own national interests during that time. But what I don't expect them to do, including our so-called allies, is to try to help us. They're not going to help us. Why would they? We even help them, I mean, I hate to bring up Ukraine again, but my God, we've destroyed Europe, their economy. Think about the Nord Stream explosion, Nord Stream 2. We did that. Okay, there is no doubt in my mind the American government did that. And I say this only because President Biden, when he was still lucid, stated that he would do that. Okay, so did people that work for him. And then after it happened, they were very amenable to, yeah, that's a good thing that we did that. Okay, so they may not have, we don't have the smoking gun, but actually we do have the smoking gun. But but on the surface, this is all denied. But think about what that means. You have a friendly ally, only ally we can trust, European, Germany, let's say Germany, England, these countries around the EU. These are our really only allies, except for Israel, and Israel will do nothing for us. I mean, Israel sees us as a total.
It's like a host to
Yes,
suck the blood from.
that's right. Yeah, we're a host to suck the blood. Israel's got us right where they want us, and they're not going to help us. But Europe would have, and there's some affection in Europe for Americans. There's been obviously, we came from Europe, our government, our people. So, and we destroyed that because we are willing to let old people die of freezing to death in the winter or go bankrupt paying their electric bills. We were willing to destroy a natural gas pipeline because we didn't like who was providing the gas. They were our enemy. It wasn't our pipeline to destroy. It was in Germany. Of course, Germany's behavior is horrendous. I mean, but that's a sign of to me, Germany is already a failed state. But the good thing about Germany is they have the ability, when Germany before it unified was very well governed. I forget what they call them, regions, provinces. They don't call them that, but there's something else they call the German states. But Bavaria, for example, they have the names that we all recognize, and they're totally capable of managing their own affairs. There's no doubt about that. But the government of Germany just laid down and said, oh, go ahead and destroy our economy. And Germany's economy is the European economy for the most part. That is the engine of the EU, engine of Europe. So if that's how we treat our friends, how could we ever think that our enemies would look kindly and help us in a time of need? They won't. And they shouldn't. They shouldn't, because our government is not worthy of that help. The bad thing is Americans, we are, we're probably okay people, just like everybody. But we have this government that is going to fail. And when it fails, there's going to be a lot of pain.
Wow. Okay. So I had 6 topics and we have covered one. That's a good start.
Sorry. Okay. Well, I'll be more succinct.
No. This was great. I loved every second of it. So maybe we just have to have you back again
Okay, sure.
to discuss the specific things, the wars in Russia and so on.
Yeah, good. Well, I definitely can come back whenever you need to, and I'll try to be more focused on so we can get through the questions.
Well, no, so I love this, because this sort of a free flow of the conversation and the topics that just like randomly become those are the best, because if we try to squeeze into a few seconds, into with 3 minutes, then it's more like the talking points, and then we miss all the nuances.
Yeah. Okay.
So this was wonderful.
Good.
Thank you so much. So where can people find you, follow your writings, the interviews, and so on?
Yeah. Well, mainly LouRockwell.com is the one I put all my articles. I don't write that. I mean, once a week, maybe if on a good week, I'll have article out. So LouRockwell.com. I do have a Substack, which they can search on my name and find it. And then I've been talking with Judge Napolitano, of course, usually on Tuesday afternoons. But of course, you can go to the judgenap.com site, and that will be interviews and things like that. And I post every article that I do at Lou Rockwell, and my Substack also is on Judge Nap's website somewhere. You have to look for it in the op-ed type thing. So yeah, so I'm kind of trying to be out there and hope we have to provide alternative views because people need to wake up, and if they hear it and they don't like it, that's good. I'm glad if they don't like it. I want them to do some research and start finding out why they don't like what they're hearing, if they like it. Now, of course, if they like it, and the Judge Napa audience and the Lou Rockwell audience does like it because they already agree, maybe they'll send it to their friends and neighbors and who need to think about it, because we do have to think about all these problems. They are coming at us very rapidly. Many of them are already here, and we have to think about why we're unhappy, because some people, I'm not unhappy, but people will be unhappy, and they need to put the blame in the right place, I think. I hope that happens. Anyway, we'll see.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Karen. We look forward to seeing you again.
Okay, super. Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.